All right. Anyway, so my name is Sam Goodwin. I'm working on a product called Alchemy for the last year or so. It's an infrastructure as code framework in TypeScript. And the original version was all about async TypeScript. And then I became effect pilled, and the V2 is now all about effect. And I've been obsessed probably the last 10 years with infrastructure as code. I've used every tool for the longest time, of starting all the way from CloudFormation, CDK, Pulumi, SST, and I found them all to be lacking and not what I want. So I've been working for the last year or so. I'm building it from the ground up in effect, and I've got a little demo prepared here that I can jump into, or if you want to pause there for a moment, we can.
Yeah, I mean, we can sort of launch into the demo and then we can ask questions and things. I'm sure the chat's going to have questions as well. Well, there's already actually a question in the chat, which we can maybe defer till later, but I think it's also a trolling question.
Yeah.
Because it's coming from I forget how I'm supposed to pronounce this. It's like, it's Fooz. Fifth.
Our troll.
Our own personal troll asking if you can use effect cluster with Alchemy, maybe one day.
I'm sure you can deploy that to any ECS or EC2 or whatever you want. Yeah, I focus more on HTTP API and RPC for the moment because I'm more of a serverless junkie. But yeah, no reason why you couldn't. At the bottom, it's just infrastructure as code, right?
And chat, maybe you can let us know also if we need to zoom in or anything like that. But for now, we'll just keep everything the same. And then you folks can let us know if things are too small, if you can't see something, or if you have questions. But yeah, Sam, feel free.
Yeah, all right. So the idea is that, in the world of AI, we really want to start optimizing the whole developer experience, or what I would call the agentic loop, right? I'm calling that zero to production, right? And effect is probably the best foundation to do that I've found. And Alchemy takes that the next step by bringing in infrastructure and taking you all the way from like a blank screen to a production ready service with CI/CD, tests, operations, monitoring, alarms, all that, right? So we have done that by rebuilding infrastructure as code from the ground up in TypeScript, or I call native TypeScript, but also native effects. So the whole thing is effect to the bones. You don't have to use effect in your runtime everywhere, but you really should, and I'd like to show why. So the way you get started is we have this little sneaky prompt that you can copy from our landing page. So I'll copy that, and I'm going to just throw that in there. So this is going to be an AI demo, which means I've got some randomness, but like the whole point is that AI should be writing all your code. I started by writing. I was preparing for this and I was writing by hand. I'm like, what am I doing? It just takes too long. I make all the mistakes. So instead, I'm just going to throw this in AI, and what it will do is it'll create a scaffold and it'll give us our basic stack, which I can start with, and we can start to layer on parts of our infrastructure and our application. So what you'll notice here is we've got a very simple TypeScript project, and we've got one file called Alchemy run TS, right? And let me know if I need to zoom in, but the core of Alchemy are resources and stacks, right? So this is a stack. You just export default your stack from any file, but we also have a convention that alchemy.run TS, which is
it
also
probably is worth zooming in, Sam. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but the chat, it's probably worth zooming in because the chat is notorious for yelling at me about they can't see things.
All right, there you go. Is it zoomed in? That's good. Yeah,
I think it's good. They'll yell if they have any problems.
All right. Okay, so Alchemy run TS, that's your stack, but you can put stacks in any file. It's just TypeScript. Like we don't say, hey, it must be this file, right? But what you do is you export default this stack, and there's a little bit of boilerplate, and then you have an effect. And in here is where you declare your resources, right? So if you've used Pulumi or CDK, it should look quite familiar, except we got our friendly little yield star. So it's based on effect. This effect will give me a bucket, right? So that's a resource. And then if I deploy this, so if I run Alchemy deploy, we'll see a plan, right? So it loads that stack and it goes, okay, what do we got? We got a bucket and I can deploy it, right? And I'll deploy this to Cloudflare and we see a bucket name pop out. And that's because we're returning the outputs. So you can see that I've got this bucket name output, very similar to Pulumi. This is common in infrastructure as code. It's basically a pure reference to a value that will be resolved at deploy time. So it doesn't exist. You can't get it until after deploy. But you just return those and they print, right? So that's pretty standard infrastructure as code experience. But I'll call out one thing here, which is because it's effects, it's so much easier to plug in your own implementations of resources, right? Compared to Pulumi or CDK, where custom resources are just like a real pain. For us, it's just layers, right? So if I was to come and import layer here and then replace this with layer.empty, we'll get a type error because the provider is missing for the resources that you're trying to deploy. So again, all about feedback for the AI, right? Like as much as we can squeeze into the type system, it's better for AI. It's just going to be able to iterate quicker. And if I get rid of this bucket, you'll see that the error goes away. So it's like it's aware of which resources you're creating, so it knows, hey, you need these layers and you have to provide them. So I put that back and error goes away and I can deploy the stack again. But this is like standard infrastructure as code. I would describe Alchemy, like the core of it is just infrastructure as code. To that question before, you can deploy anything you want. But there's a reason why I also am calling this infrastructure as effects. And I'll show that by putting a worker here. So this is where it goes beyond standard infrastructure as code and into a new layer. So I'll say, set me up a hello world worker that just gets and puts to the bucket. So
And while that's running, Sam, I have a
yeah,
question. The
mm,
providers and the state, I'm assuming that the state is like how Alchemy tracks the resources that have or have not been deployed and like what their current state is.
that's right. Yeah.
Uh, and using Cloudflare.state here means that your state file or whatever, however you're storing state exists in Cloudflare. If I'm understanding correctly, right?
Yes, so we automatically deploy a Cloudflare worker, and it's backed by a durable object, and each stack is stored in a durable object. And we do that. It's super fast. It's persistent. If you're already using Cloudflare, you can just drop it in there and it works. But like you can throw in another one. There's local state if you just want to rip locally. There's in-memory state, which I use for tests everywhere. There's AWS state if you want to build your own. It's just layers, right? The whole point is just like take advantage of effect here. You can plug in
And
anything.
the providers thing here, this is just a layer, which you mentioned. So does that mean that if my stack is using resources from both like, I don't know, Cloudflare and AWS, that I could compose two sets of providers together
Yep,
to
just
to get
layer.merge all AWS.providers and in you go. Yeah.
super nice?
And the type system will prompt you the whole way, right? Like depending on how long this demo takes, but if I get to the end, I'll show AWS as well. I'm starting with Cloudflare because I don't know, Cloudflare is just so awesome. Like going back to AWS from Cloudflare is not so fun, but like there's some cool stuff we can do with IAM policies that I'll show at the end. But let me just show what we've created here. You'll notice that it moved the bucket out into a separate one, and it did that because these are just effects, right? I need to reference it elsewhere. They're pure. They don't do anything. I can just put them in a file, and then I can reference them elsewhere.